you so much for joining me. I'm Dustin Ganay, the lead organizer for the LAUXR meetup. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Michael Huber. The reason why I wanted to have Michael as one of our speakers, like I said, we work together at Access, better known as AXS, the ticketing company. Um, when I started at Access about a year ago, I was in a presentation with Michael, who is the product manager there, as well as another designer. And I was really impressed, not only by the research rigor that Michael showed, but the way that he talked about his feature development, with a really data-driven approach, with not just user research, but with analytics, with A/B testing. It was a very compelling story, and he had the results to prove it. And so immediately I started to like this guy, Michael. And since our year of working together, I've got to know him better, and he's not only a really smart PM, he's also just a really nice guy. And so I'm really excited for his talk today, because who better than a PM to help us researchers deliver more impact and influence in our business? And that's really what Michael is great at. But with that, let me pass the mic to Michael Huber.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I appreciate it. And hello, everybody. Thanks for joining this talk. Super excited to um, meet everybody of you virtually and hopefully see a lot of you also in the next few meetups and also on the walk on Saturday. Today, I will speak about why good research isn't enough and how to turn insights into impact. And why I chose this topic is for a specific reason, because as a product manager, I've sat in a lot of research readouts over the years and also conducted a fair share of my own research. And looking back, the difference between the research that actually changed what we built versus the research that got acknowledged and then forgotten was almost never about the quality of the research itself. We tend to focus a lot about how to do better research, like better methods, better synthesis, better presentation, and all those things do matter. But what I kept seeing was that really solid work was getting ignored and it had nothing to do with how good it was. So the hardest part isn't doing the research itself, it's getting it to actually influence a decision. And before I get into it, I'm very curious where everybody's at. So this will be like one of the few interactive elements that it would everybody that is on a call invite to participate in. We'll have a quick poll that Dustin is launching with the question, what are your biggest challenges with research?
Okay. Well, I think we got some good responses here. Let me end the poll. All right, and I'm going to share the results.
I can see that, yes. So I'm seeing stakeholder right findings 61%, but throughout, like all of those challenges seem to resonate very well with the group, which is super great because then you're at the right location at the right talk. Let's start with challenge number one, which is that insights don't influence decisions. So what are some of those patterns? So what's the pattern that we are seeing here is that most researchers put in the work and the research was good, and then the insight was clear. And then you have your readout, you present in the research and the findings, and then we have a gap. And worst case, there's no change. We're just moving in the same direction as before, and all this research is not used. So let's talk about this gap. It usually comes down to a few things. First one, the insight does not have a clear so what. So what are we doing with that insight? And people don't people understand it, but they don't know what to do with it. It's not attached to any specific decisions or anything they're trying to influence and make. And because of that, it's pretty easy to acknowledge and move on from that without anything actually changing. What tends to work better is thinking about what makes an insight actually usable. And the ones that land are usually tied to a decision someone is genuinely trying to make. So they connect to something observable in how people behave. They point to something in the product that could actually change, and they have some implication for a metric. I also prepared an example here. So a weak example would be um, the insight is users are confused overall in this specific flow and there are issues with it. So there's really nothing to grab onto this. How to make that more actionable and usable is when we compare it to this strong example. The users are confused, which is the same as the first statement, but we add some additional context. And therefore, there's a drop-off at this specific step 3, let's say. And simplifying that step would likely improve our completion rate by maybe X%. And now in this example, there's something someone can actually bring into a prioritization conversation and do something with. And both statements, the weak one and the strong one, have the same underlying research, but the difference is how the question was framed going in with. And that framing often happens long before the research actually starts. And that often happens when the problem isn't clearly defined, when nobody has named a specific decision the research is meant to inform, when the right stakeholders aren't involved. We'll talk about that a little bit later in more detail as well. Then the findings come back without anywhere solid to land. I also like to tie it to the product principles that like us as product managers are faced on a day-to-day basis. First one, I think one of the most important principles that we have, focus on problems, not solutions. We are trying to always stay in a problem space because it's so easy to switch into solution. But our guideline is dependent on the project, trying to push to 70 or 80% of time, really spend on the problems we are trying to solve rather than these are all the solutions that are potentially possible. And the second thing is also focusing on outcome and not output. What that means is it's really important to deliver, or it's much more important to deliver less high quality products or features versus just a set of as many as possible features that might not do anything or even in the worst case reverse some of the positive impact that was there before and established there. And based on those principles, it's very important to frame some of the key questions that are worth answering when going into research from the start. So what problem are we solving? Who is affected? What decision will this inform? And what does success look like? I like to go into a real world example here, which I found super interesting. So when Airbnb, back when it initially started, they were struggling. They were bringing in about $200 a week and generally facing bankruptcy. They had the concept, that the platform, but the bookings were not happening. So what happens is they did research, and then the founders went to New York and met with hosts to figure out why this is happening. They realized that the issue was not the website functionality or the concept itself, but rather that listings seemed sketchy and unappealing due to the terrible low quality photos that were provided. And back in the day, not everybody had a nice smartphone and a great camera. Hosts were using flip phones and cheap cameras, and the listings therefore looked dark, blurry, and cluttered. And the images made staying in a stranger's home feel like a risk. So what the founders did is they acted on these insights and on this problem space. they rented a camera and went door to door to the listings or the hosts they had listings with, and made photos of the listings themselves. And within a week after doing this, these listings with the updated photos, the revenue doubled to $400. And the only variable that changed was the photo quality. And that experiment eventually became what we know now as the professional photography program, which allows listing with professional photos. And once those were used, hosts would see 3 times more bookings. And hosts earned an average and over $1,000 more per month by using those photos, professional photos. So if we tie this story back to our 4 questions we discussed, what problems are we solving? Not that bookings are low, that was the symptom, but the real problem was that the guests could not build enough trust from what they were seeing to feel comfortable staying in a stranger's home. And then who was affected? It was both the guests who were not comfortable staying there and also the hosts because they were losing income because nobody felt comfortable staying at their Airbnbs. Then the question, what decision will this inform? This was crucial because this defined where to go next. Do we invest time and research and product development in redesigning the product, running ads, or do we do something else completely? And the research that they did themselves pointed them away from all those and towards something much simpler. And then what does success look like? Revenue going up, and it did within a week. That was noticeable. So these 4 questions were part of the research to deeply understand the problem and also asked at the right moment before any solution was committed to. And their lesson was that in a marketplace, trust is the currency. And these high quality photos was the fastest way to build that trust and make guests comfortable staying at strangers' apartments. And the founders learned that visual trust was more important than any of the other new features that could have improved the platform. And that really made it possible for Airbnb to scale as to what it is right now. Let's talk about the second problem. So there's no time to do it properly. Quick show of hands. Who has seen teams jump into solutions before fully understanding the problem they were solving? So you can use the raise hand feature within Zoom just to get a quick count as to how many people can resonate with that statement. Are we awesome?
I think
Seeing
I think everybody's hands are up, Michael.
that's fantastic. That's exactly where it tends to end up with this question, because that also leads to a lot of downstream pain points. So the reality and why this is happening often from a product POV, product teams are under a lot of pressure, and we are constantly pressured to make fast decisions, priorities are constantly competing, and there's rarely a lot of space or as much as space as we need, as we would like to do the research that would actually help us. So speed becomes the default. And the first thing that gets squeezed is the understanding phase. It just gets skipped over or minimized. And figuring out whether the problem is real, whether the direction is right, whether the assumption people are building up actually hold up, gets less and less time. And when that happens, when moving too fast, there's a high risk of solving the wrong problem. The thing is, when teams skip the understanding phase, the time they think they're saving shows usually up somewhere else later. It just moves the cost downstream and potentially gets even more costly. Solution gets built for the wrong problem, work gets redone, and more time needs to be spent on reverting decisions and doing additional research. But given the reality is that often there's not enough time, and I think most people in product that are working with product managers know that, the worst version of continuing is for the team to pretend that there is enough time. So what tends to work better is being honest about the constraint and making a real choice to balance out that scale. So either you make the risk visible and push for more time when the stakes are high enough to justify it, which can be a good approach, or you cut down at the scope to what matters most. Focus everything on the single most important unknown and let go of the rest. And the team that handle either of those pretty well are faring much better under time pressure than others. And Airbnb, let's go back to that example. The counterfactual is worth thinking about too. Let's say they didn't do all the research, they just wanted to launch, they wanted to get more bookings. If they had kept building the features and skipped research, so let's say they focused on better search, better messaging, better payments, while the photos stayed terrible, none of it would have mattered. Speed on the wrong problem is just a faster way to get to the wrong place and spend a lot more money. Another tip here is thinking in phases. This can also be highly beneficial, especially when time is short. And that is, you don't have to answer everything at once. It can be very overwhelming if you start a new project and there's so many things to answer. But what really helps is breaking it down and starting with the smallest version of the question first. And then once this is answered, you can validate whether the direction is even right before investing heavily in a full solution, and then expand based on what you can actually find. Something I saw that worked well was a checkout flow that needed significant restructuring. And rather than moving all the steps of the checkout flow at once, the team started by consolidating just a few of the most friction-heavy steps in one part of the flow. And then they measured the result and the impact of the change before touching anything else. And the result from that first phase gave them the data they needed to justify moving the remaining steps. And because they've already proven the direction was right, the broader rollout had alignment. It wouldn't have had if they've tried to do everything at once. And what really helped here is that the first phase earned the second phase. There was continuous incremental value delivered over time, both in research as well as product development and outcome. So in summary, with successful phasing, you earn the right to build more by providing impact early. Let's go into the third challenge here. Too much research, not enough clarity. And we have another interactive element here. Which one actually influences decisions more in your experience? The first option is an example, would be a 40-slide research report, or the other one is a one-page summary with clear recommendations. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna just end the poll there. I think this is pretty much unanimous. Not a big surprise, Michael. Pretty much everyone said the one-page summary with clear recommendations is the one that influenced decisions.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's great insight, and I'm glad a lot of people feel that way. One thing I want to say though, that I think both are important, but only a combination of both will have the biggest impact. So the 40-slide research report will give you the detailed knowledge about methodology, issues, and user behavior which is crucial to have a deep understanding and also sharing that deep understanding with whoever you interact with. What I see often is that it stops there. So you just have the deck and that's it. But with real stakeholders and even product managers as well, the comprehensive report can get ignored because in a real working environment under the real time pressure we discussed, people need to quickly understand what to do next. And if that isn't immediately obvious, we just move on. So I want to share something from my own experience here because I think it illustrates this example very well. So I've been in many conversations as a product manager receiving feedback, and two very distinct situations stick out. In the first situation, a researcher walked me and my team through their findings for over an hour. The work was very thorough, detailed methodology, every user session documented, and every theme was analyzed. So as I mentioned, very, very thorough. But by the end of that, everyone in the room and in the meeting was overwhelmed. There was so much there that we genuinely didn't know where to start or what to do next. The research was great, but we couldn't act on it or we couldn't use it. And the second situation was completely different. The researcher came in with a concise executive summary, key findings, clear recommendations, and some of the most important, or even everything on the 40-slide research report was in the appendix. And the main slides took about 10 to 15 minutes to go through. And when we had questions, we then dig deeper into some of the specifics that were outlined in the appendix. But I was able to take even one or two slides of those key findings into my product deck to communicate what we've learned and why it mattered. And if we compare these two situations, and you might see a theme arise here, the same amount of underlying research happened with both 40 slide and one page, but a completely different outcome. The difference was how it was ended and how that research was tied and usable. So making research usable, after finishing research, the outcome needs to be designed for the environment it's going to live in. If a decision gets made in a fast product conversation with limited time, a document that requires 45 minutes, 1 hour walkthrough isn't going to survive that context. What tends to work is a clear executive summary, as everybody agreed here on the call, and the key findings stated plainly and specific recommendations as well. Something easy to share and reference quickly and have a starting point to have a discussion off of. And if your research outcome can fit into a concise product deck, it's very likely that it won't shape any business or product decisions down the line. Fourth challenge, being brought in too late to matter. Let's talk about the situation. By the time research gets called in, the solution is already largely defined. The timeline is set, and what actually being asked for is validation and not really discovery. Someone needs research to support a direction that's already been chosen, and with this puts you in a difficult spot before you've even started. So what this looks like in practice, it usually sounds something like, can we quickly validate this before we launch? Heavy emphasis on quickly. The scope is fixed, timeline is pretty tight, and by the time you're involved, the range of decisions you can actually influence is pretty low. How can you still make an impact with that? So what do you do in that situation? The move that tends to work best is resisting the framing of validation and reorienting towards risk reduction. Those feel similar, but they're actually quite different. Validation is about just confirming the decision or the opinions that are already existing. And risk reduction is about identifying what could go wrong before it's too late to do anything about it. And from there, It's about being ruthless with scope. What decision is actually still open? What's the highest risk assumption that hasn't been tested? Focus everything on that. You're not going to reshape the entire direction at that point, but you can reduce the cost of being wrong on the things that matter most. And that's genuinely valuable even when the conditions aren't ideal. And then challenge number 5, we got the most responses, stakeholder overriding findings. So let's talk about that situation as well. So the research was solid and the findings were clear, but then a stakeholder came in with a different view and the research got set aside. Most researchers have been there, most product managers have been there, and it's one of the more frustrating things to experience because you did everything right and it still did not matter. And when I've looked at why this actually happens, there are a few things that tend to come up consistently. The stakeholder wasn't involved early, so the research feels like something that happened without them. They have different criteria for what success looks like, and nobody aligned on that upfront. Or the insight when framed in a way that connected to the decisions they were trying to solve. Or they're hearing things for the first time in the readout that should have come up weeks earlier while the discovery was still happening. So how to prevent that? The fix for most of these also happen before the research starts. Very, very important to get alignment at what decisions the research is meant to inform. And the key point here is identifying the right stakeholders and bringing them into the process early enough that they feel some ownership over the questions. And also sharing what's being learned along the way rather than saving everything for a final readout. When we have worked on past projects, we deliberately brought stakeholders in, even clients in very early, and they helped shape the research questions and answers as well, and really defined our problem space for us as well. So we checked in with them along the way, and by the time the readout happened, at the end of the research phase, it was almost a confirmation of things they've already been thinking through with us. People were super engaged, supportive, excited to act on what we've found. And some of them became even advocates for the research with their own teams. And the stakeholders felt like they were part of it, and it led to a phenomenal outcome. And then volunteering even for the next projects, they want to be part of it and really loved being heard and understood from the start on, not just being decision being made and they feel like they're not part of the process and out of it. So the key lesson is when the right stakeholders have been part of the process early on and throughout, they engage with findings way differently. Another thing I want to point out here with stakeholder communication in general that is interesting is that there's stakeholders think naturally in solutions. Someone identifies a problem, and within a few minutes, the room is deep into how to solve it, and then the rest of the meeting is spent this way. But research tends to have the most influence when you keep pulling the conversation back to the problem space before that happens. And you can do that by asking, okay, what are we actually trying to solve? Like, who is affected by it? And what decisions are we trying to make right now? And always tying it back to the user problems or the problems in general that maybe the stakeholders or clients are facing. But these questions sound simple, but they really help get the right insights from the start. And let's speak about impact and measurement as well. Let's talk about how to know if it worked. The thing that actually matters in the end is whether the behavior has changed. Are users actually doing something different because of what the research found and then what the feature looked like when it was built? So how to know if that worked? User behavior changes. So what people actually do is different. Hopefully, the product metrics also have a positive impact. Conversion increases, drop off drops, there's higher engagement. And then it's also tied, hopefully, to a business outcome with higher conversion. Hopefully, there's also higher revenue with more engagement, less drop off. There's hopefully also higher retention. So it's very important to keep those in mind and make those observable. They can be made observable with an A/B test, with funnel analysis, session replay tools, simple post-action survey, whatever you can do, or whatever you can get, or whatever you can partner your product resource or business resource with getting those findings is super helpful, because the goal is to make the effect that you research observable. When you can point to a finding and show what changed because of it, everything shifts in terms of how research gets treated going forward. So I want to close the measurement section with something from my own experience, because I think it showed what's possible when the loop actually gets closed. We had a research-heavy project, very user-focused, very hypothesis-driven, with a clear measurement framework built in from the start. And then we ran that research, made decisions based on what we found, and then tracked the impact with proper tooling. And the results were significant. The success of that project opened up more time and budget for research initiatives going forward. And also other teams started adopting a similar discovery process, and the measurement put a monetary value to the time spent researching. And it changed how the organization thought about research investment in general. So every time you close the loop between a finding and a measurable outcome, you're building the case for research being involved earlier next time. And it also shows that research works. It really builds credibility with the people who control how time and also how budget gets allocated. And over time, it creates a space for more research rather than less. Every challenge we talked about today, insights not landing, time pressure, unclear outputs, late involvement, stakeholders overriding findings, they all come back to the same thing, that the insights only matter if it changes what gets built. So research that happens outside this decision-making process is going to struggle, regardless of how good the work is. The researchers I've seen have the most impact are the ones who figured out that impactful, influential communication, scoping, alignment, decision framing is what determines whether any of it matters in the end. I do hope that some of the techniques and some of the insights and some of the examples do resonate and help becoming one of those researchers and strengthening your research practice and making those insights count even more going forward.